Right, so hey everyone, welcome back to the MarMar's podcast. I'm Maria, and this is
I'm Marie.
Marie. And today we have two guests. We're going to be talking about STEM and humanities. Would you like to introduce yourselves?
Hi, I am Miss Chambers. I teach choir and music theory at Highland Park High School.
I'm Mr. Marks. I teach physics and environmental science, and I have notes. I'm ready to go. I'm excited.
I'm excited.
That's good. All right, I guess we're going to start with what they are. So you guys could maybe like provide a definition of what they are first.
So STEM is it's actually kind of a newer phrase if you didn't know. I think like people in high school now are like very familiar with like hearing STEM, but it hasn't been around forever. But anyway, it's an acronym standing for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. There's also a movement, fittingly, to introduce the idea of STEAM. If you ever heard it, can you guess what the A stands for?
Art.
It's the arts.
Yeah. So it's like a big movement to like incorporate because there's like more overlap than people think. But anyway, STEM in general is like just encompassing technology and science and math and all that kind of good stuff.
And the humanities is kind of everything else. So it's the branch of learning that involves human beings and our culture, our society, the way that we think, the way that we feel, the way that we behave, kind of all of the more like human sides of things, including it's kind of a wide umbrella. It encompasses, things like the arts, philosophy, history, ethics, all of that stuff.
Cool. So why do you think they're important for humanity? Like, what do you think about that?
Right. So science in general, obviously I hold near and dear to my heart. So I think one of the things that we try to sell a lot of times in like school in general, but science specifically, is like real world applications of things. So it's like if we're learning about forces, it's like here's this thing you can make that can launch a baseball really far or whatever, right? But I think the bigger thing that I care about much more than just like here's this direct application of like Newton's second law are things like so science provides like a systemic way to improve the knowledge of the human enterprise, right? So this is the thing that is valuable. It's like knowledge that you can trust because it's like robust in the standards to put it out into the world and say like as a scientific community, this is the knowledge we genuinely think is correct is like really, really, really high. So instead of just wildly speculating, like if a scientist makes a claim, it's not that they're infallible, but it's just like you can trust that it went through like a super, super, super rigorous process to reach the point where it's like out in the world, right? So obviously it's like hot button topics like a vaccine and stuff. And people are skeptical, especially in America, for all of these reasons. Some that make sense and some that don't. But like in a broader sense, it's like the advice that scientists gives, it's not perfect, but it at least is systemically really, really strong because it's just very, very hard to like work through an idea and get it passed through all these various tests that scientists do in order to say like, yeah, this is our final product and this is something you can trust. So I think it's like this just way to improve the body of knowledge in the world that ends up being really, really, you should feel confident in instead of just like speculating kind of wildly about it.
Yeah. That's awesome. And I think that honestly, the goals of humanities and STEM are really similar in that they're both just trying to understand our world and help us kind of navigate the world. And they are just taking these different approaches to do it. So, you know, while science is figuring out questions about, for example, medicine, humanities help us understand why it's important to care about people who are sick. What is it about life that is worth living that makes us want to produce these innovations and advances in technology that make our lives longer or make our lives better or allow us to travel more. It asks those questions of why that's worthwhile at all and what's important about it. And it has the additional aspect of allowing people to express themselves, and kind of that's a uniquely human trait is our ability to produce meaningful art. And it's for many people what makes them proud to be human, what makes them want to answer these questions and um, think creatively to solve problems and deal critically and logically with the questions of life.
Nice.
I think what I'm hearing from what both of you are saying is that like STEM and humanities are really connected. Like they kind of like work together for like a better humanity, just like a better world. Like they all have like different parts that like integrate with each other and like all help each other out. So on that topic, what are some pros and cons in your like field that you would think of?
What I think with science a lot is a lot of people who do science, either like studying it or like actual scientists, have a real big problem with elitism and just like making the field largely inaccessible. So like I think physics is great. I really like it. It's a good field. I studied it in college. It was really hard, but I'm like, all right, it was pretty good. Give me opportunities to do fun things in life. But a lot of physics people are just like in college at least just terrible. Like they're really arrogant because they're just like, I can do these things in these problems that no one else can do, and I'm a better person because of it, which is terrible. And like I feel like I'm sounding like I'm doing a bit that's exaggerated, but this is actually how a lot of scientific like communities work. They're very like insular and in a bubble. And it's like they're bad at like communicating their ideas to the public or just like are making the field more accessible. So one issue specifically in physics that I like to tell the story because I think it's wild and super interesting. So physics has a problem historically and currently of the difference between like who studies it, right? So like I majored in physics, and at Pitt there were like 28 people who graduated with a physics degree, and like two of them, there were three women and 25 men, and which is very typical with physics major makeup and everything. And I remember talking to someone like people I was graduating with, and they're like, I remember asking just like, do we think this is like a problem? And a lot of people say like, no. They're like, there's nothing like specifically happening that's preventing women from doing physics, which is just like not true. And like there's this crazy anecdote we're talking to one of my professors about, like one of the few like women professors I had in physics. So like in our physics building, there were 4 floors, right? And each floor there was like a men's bathroom, but there's one women's bathroom in the whole building that was in the basement. And I remember just thinking like, I remember like talking to some people I was in class with about this, and this is like a true story, so I'm not making this up. And I remember just being like, that seems bad. But like a lot of people just think like, no, like they're just like, statistically there's only like a few women in the building in a typical day, so why do we need to have one on every floor? And it's like a
Right,
great
but then
example of
they're
like,
also saying the same thing about, well, there's nothing preventing
yeah,
women from entering this field, while there's these like small it's using numbers and statistics to justify continuing to pour resources towards specific people's access.
yeah. So that's what irks me about the STEM fields a lot in a lot of cases. Like they're in the inaccessibility, but also people's like unwillingness to like acknowledge the fact that it's inaccessible. I find that like super interesting and like something to think about, you know?
Yeah, I think a major con of humanities and the arts specifically, my field within the humanities, is that I believe it's fundamentally important. I think everyone needs to have a humanities education. Everyone needs to be able to like ask these questions and think subjectively and philosophically. But we live in a very STEM centric world where kids are expected to, travel down this path of success, and the question of what that looks like. And a lot of students are pressured to pursue STEM fields because they're seen as more viable professionally. And then, of course, we have this smaller and smaller field of students in the arts, which makes the professional field of the arts smaller and smaller, therefore less and less viable as a professional pursuit. And so it's kind of this negative cycle. Uh, and the only thing standing in the way, I think, of the arts being seen at the same level as STEM as a professional field is where the money is and where the funding is. And right now, we live in a world where all of the money is in Silicon Valley. It's all in the tech industry and the military defense industry and corporate corporate like lobbying, and the arts are largely funded by communities and kind of lower levels where there isn't as much money. And if the arts had the kind of money pouring into it that like tech did, kids who wanted to pursue the arts wouldn't face those kinds of barriers and those social pressures to pursue it. And so that's kind of the hardest thing that we have to deal with in humanities is basically convincing society that it is important and worth resources.
Right, yeah, like there's like certain families that will always think like be a doctor, be an engineer, because they always think that it's better because it makes you more intelligent and like you make more money. But those kids usually want to pursue like liberal arts or something because they're more interested in that, but they're being pressured to go into the STEM field because it's seen as better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really it feels to me like it's really about choice, and that's what's important. I don't think that humanities are better than STEM. I think that they are both two sides of the same coin. They're both trying to seek answers and solve questions and bring people closer together and make life better. And so it's just kind of a lopsided coin right now, and some kids love science and want to pursue science. Some kids love the arts, want to pursue the arts, and those paths should be cleared either way.
Yeah, it's not like either field, right, has it's not like either one has a monopoly on critical thinking. Like it is a kind of universal skill. I mean, it literally is
Mm-hmm.
a universal skill, but I think um sometimes it gets lopped into like, oh, this is like a STEM thing, like critically thinking. But like, and one of the things I really like is like that Chambers mentioned is like philosophy. And I think if you get into philosophy ever, it's like super cool. And like the perception of it is kind of like strange. It's just like this weird like thing where you're just like thinking about like nothing. But like philosophy trains you to think in a really like rigorous and really like specific way. And I think like that's a great example where like you critically think through like making like a really strong like philosophical argument. I mean, sometimes more than just like doing a math problem, which can just be like, you know this, like a lot of math problems end up being very algorithmic. Like you're just like, once I know the setup for the problem, I just go through the steps that I've done a million times. I factor it this way, I get my answer. Like that's not really like critical thinking. You're just like doing like a mini little robotic thing just as a person,
It's
you know?
memorization. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of times. Yeah, which is like no fun.
Yeah, but the top level scientists are able to think critically because you have to solve problems no one's ever solved before. And so yeah, that kind of transcends fields. But having the ability to think critically and think ethically is so important in the science field. And that's why that overlap is so important. Machines are controlling our lives more and more. And so the more kind of power that we give to technology, the more it's important that we understand the way that it's going to impact humans. I mean, we've kind of seen the negative side effects of what it's like to have a field of STEM professionals that don't have a humanities education. And we get huge problems like when machine learning has to make decisions about the values of certain human lives over others. Robots can't make those decisions. We need to be studying these ethics and questions and understanding other human beings to grapple with that. I mean, Mr. Marks was talking about representation in science, and it goes the same way. For example, like AI technology, facial recognition technology can't recognize non-white faces the way that it can recognize white faces, and that is due to a lack of racial representation in STEM in America. So these are what people think of as like objective facts are not actually as objective as we think. Science and math are not objective at all. They're totally subjective, and things like representation and the ability to answer questions critically and think philosophically are an important part of innovation and technological advancement.
Chambers, you stole my example. The facial tech one is
Oh
real.
my
It's such
gosh.
a it's like a real
Yeah.
thing where like a lot of like tech specific like CS stuff is like people think it's like value neutral, as in to say that, it seems like it's like independent of like, any sort of like social context or anything. But like it seeps in like really subtle ways. Like the facial for technology one is like a big one where it's like, because the way you could think of it, right, is you train the computer to recognize faces, And like if you think about it, right, if you're just kind of like working in a like a research lab with a few other people, the first faces you will feed the computer are just like the ones in the research lab. Like, this is actually how it happened. So like you just like, all right, let's train it to like look at faces, and like let's just use our own real quick to make sure it works, and then it all kind of like seeps out from there, which is like really interesting stuff.
Yeah. Have you guys seen the big thing now with the Twitter picture algorithm? How if you put an image on Twitter, the preview of the image is a crop of it, and then you have to click on it to see the full thing. And it uses technology to crop the image to what it detects to be like the most important part of the image. Like, for example, if I post a picture of myself against like in the forest, it will find my face because it knows that faces are the most important thing, and it'll crop to my face. And people have been finding holes in this algorithm where they will post a picture of two people, maybe one a black person and a white person in the same image, and the crop, no matter which way you switch the images, the crop will always go to the white face. And so it's showing that the algorithm is literally detecting that certain races are more important than others, and that's not value neutral at all.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing where obviously, I mean, hopefully at least, that this was not like an intended consequence. Like it's so like I think people like read this kind of stuff and they see it happen, and then they just like they get like really really defensive, which like I understand, right? But like it's a great example of something that's like implicit. Like it's no one's fault directly in the sense of like no one intended this, but like these are the kind of things that happen if we don't like try to do better with this type of stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't know, it's just so neat.
I agree.
Well, enough about cons. We have to have some positivity. What are some
Yes.
pros about, being in your field?
Hmm.
What I love about humanities and what I love about the arts is that it teaches us a balance of things that are objective and things that are potentially limitless creatively. So there are certain things that are true, which you this is the finger you need to use to play a C on a trumpet. That's objective. But what's not objective is once you understand the amount of notes at your disposal, what you can create with those notes, what you can do with it, how you can be expressive um, within a structure that is somewhat rigid. We have this fundamental need for expression, and no two human beings are alike. Even two best friends who think that they do everything together all the time have these inner needs that are slightly different, and the humanities have a way of allowing people to express that at any time, at any moment, in whatever way they want. And we learn so much about humans based on the way that we choose to express ourselves. And if I didn't have music both as a performer and just an enjoyer of music, if I didn't have that kind of validation of my human experience, I would feel a lot more alone. And it's a way I like the way that it connects me to other people on the level of a soul level, like down in our core, where you just like listen to a song, you're like, they get me. They get me. I'm not alone in the universe. There are other people like me. It's just such a special and joyous feeling, that connection that the arts can bring.
Yeah, and so that's not an easy answer to follow because that's great. But like, I don't know, it's like kind of like in science where like one thing is I like to push back against, at least try to, like in class, is like a lot of times in school science you're doing like any sort of lab you do is basically like it's just like you're baking a cake. You're just like following these steps and you get like this prescribed result, and you're like, boom, that's science. We showed that blank happens when you do this. But like when you're actually doing it for real, it's like a tremendously creative process, which is really satisfying. It's like the idea that like you have a new idea, like an actually new idea, not just like one that we're doing for school or something, and you want to try to see like how well that idea like actually like maps onto the world and how well it like truly represents something that's going on. Like to in order to like make tests to figure that out, it's like really like you have to be really creative in how you're going to do that. You could just set up all these different parameters and figure out how you're going to isolate like the one thing that you want to look at. And that's not easy, right? And that's why why people do this is you have creative outlets when you are doing actual science, but also is as much as tech and engineering stuff can be dicey, and we do need to think more critically about it. The reason people get into it in the first place is the idea of designing something is extremely appealing. The idea of you get to make a thing that improves something else, or something from scratch is really cool. I was just reading this thing, I forget why I was looking this up, but basically automobile accidents in the US in the last 15 years have gone down by I don't want to cite a statistic that's wrong on the podcast, but they've gone down in a statistically significant way. And I was just reading about this, and it's not the case that the cars are just magically safer in the sense of when they collide, they're just there's no danger or anything like that. But through technology, right, it's become way more standard for cars to have collision warning systems, basically, that they do the things where when you start to leave a lane, it beeps and tells you. So it's not that. So it's just an example of that's a thing that is objectively improving the world because we're preventing needless deaths by preventing the accidents in the first place. So I don't know, people did that, and they worked on that to implement that technology in order for one car to be able to detect when it's veering off or when another car is coming towards, or they automatically brake now and all that good stuff. So it's just I don't know, seeing that stuff is really encouraging. And similarly, in the pandemic, which is obviously terrible, the fact that I feel if you once you read about it and learn a little bit, the fact that the vaccine is even close-ish, only a year out basically from when COVID first hit, is actually pretty remarkable that people are able to do that. Figure out what's what the virus is in the first place, develop a vaccine for it, test it, and then make literally billions of the vaccine is just kind of amazing that can even happen on that kind of scale. So I think that kind of stuff is really cool.
I think both of them, both fields use a lot of creativity. I think there might be a stereotype that STEM field is more useful. It does a lot more for our world, and it's because it's all medical, science, engineering. But I think humanities is also very important because sometimes you can't reach your soul with science. Doing math work won't help you. In my opinion, I'm sorry, but math is not.
Oh, Marie. What is the salute?
But music connects a lot of people together, and it really helps to heal the soul. Math won't heal my soul. I'm sorry, but no. But music, I think more recently, when you listen to music, you can really feel how powerful it is, and just how someone had written it, and how they thought out all the melodies, and how much emotions are really conveyed in one thing. So I think both fields are really amazing and really complex. You can't just call it STEM and humanities. It's way more than that. But
yeah, there's a lot of crossover. I mean, even me just getting my sound set up ready for this call, I was using STEM to do it. STEM, in my mind, STEM is kind of like the foundation or the vehicle that allows the humanities to happen. So we can have this need for expression, and we won't actually be able to express ourselves without STEM, because you wouldn't be able to hear my voice if I wasn't able to use technology to get it there, to pick up the sound from my microphone and send it to my computer. The songs that you listen to, the frequency on the radio or whatever, the frequencies are very carefully manipulated to be pleasing to the ear and do all of these things. I need engineering to build instruments and understand the way that sound happens when you pluck a string. STEM is the thing that needs to happen. He's the guy working behind the scenes to make the arts expressive for everybody.
okay, here's the quick ad from our sponsor.
Make sure to try out Papagallo's Pizzeria, a new restaurant in town at 76 Raritan Ave. You can order dishes such as pizza, obviously, burgers, paninis, subs, pasta, and much more online or in person. I gotta say, the garlic knots and baked ziti look positively scrumptious. They're open 11 a.m. to 9 p.m. Monday through Thursday, 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. Friday and Saturday, and 12 p.m. to 9 p.m. Sunday. Order online at papagallospizza.com.
All right, that's pretty cool. So what made you guys like interested in your respective fields, like your experience with it?
That's a good question. I know for me, like in at least in so like in high school, I had a physics teacher that I really liked, and for a while, um, yeah, I don't know, I just like really got into it. I'm like, oh, physics is cool. There's a lot of cool stuff. There's a lot of cool things you can do, and just like really convinced me, not just on physics, but like I was saying, all the stuff with science in general, that it's like a valuable social good more than anything else. Like there's the direct ways, right, where people like major in pre-med and they become doctors, and ostensibly you're helping people do it by, you know, being a doctor and all that stuff. But it just in more subtle ways too. Just like if you value um, just like the improved education of people in general, right? Like science is a thing that is an integral part of that. And even people do stuff like, you know, scientific research sort of like on schools and learning, which is like super interesting, right? Like all these ways that you can say, you know, if we teach this way, we see that like people learn this much, but if we teach this way, they learn, you know, more or less. Like that kind of stuff is like super interesting, like these psychological fields to it. So no, I was really into that. And then so I majored in that and philosophy, like I was saying before, which I like really enjoy because it's just like a really great way of like looking at the world and like thinking about things. Because a lot of scientific stuff, like deep down, there's a lot of like art to it, like in the sense of like really, really deep in the universe. I don't know, the way it works is kind of just like whack, right? So there's all these like fundamental things of symmetry, like on really, really tiny scales. And also like the way people think the universe is going to end is basically we're going to run out of entropy, and it's just going to, if you've ever heard of the cold heat death of the universe. So basically one day everything will just trillions of years from now spread out, stop moving, and run out of energy, and that'll just kind of be the end of everything. Like I don't know, I think that's more of just like a thing to grapple with your head that's like more philosophical than actually scientific in any meaningful sense. Like this kind of existential crises about like what really makes up reality is like a really fun question. Like time doesn't move the same for everything. This is like a thing that we know basically for certain, that if you move at a different speed, time moves slower or faster for you. So Interstellar got that right in that sense. Like that kind of stuff is more
Great
philosophical and like,
movie.
yeah, love it, and more expressive than a lot of things. So yeah, that's kind of how I got into it in general. Just like really liked it, and I like the questions that it asks more than anything. Just yeah.
For me, I mean, I was always interested in the arts. I kind of grew up in a house where my parents were interested in it. Wasn't their field professionally, but um I was in high school when I realized that this is something that I wanted to do forever, and not just to be a performer, but I wanted to be a teacher and an educator, because I also thought it was really satisfying to not just love music, but it's really fun to convince other people of why something is so awesome. Like when you're trying to get somebody to watch a show that you love, and then they finally do and they love it too, and you just feel like, yeah, I showed them that show and now they love it too. I liked that feeling of helping other people understand why the arts are so beautiful and so important. High school is a really difficult time for most people, and the camaraderie that I experienced in my music program and the beautiful music that I was able to perform, and finding that as a way of expressing myself, I wouldn't have gotten through high school without it. It was really, really important. Those people and the music that I made, and I have never ever regretted it since. I'm really glad that I um against society's wishes pursued a field in the arts.
It's nice to hear about how you guys got into it. Like everyone has their own personal story, like with that spark that you knew that you wanted to pursue that career or field. That's nice. I still have not gotten that spark, but one day.
That's okay.
Some people find it when they're 45, and some people find it when they're 4. There's no timeline, and that's something that I think me and Mr. Marks, I think I can speak for both of us when I say that that's also something that is, I think, deserving of some critique in our society. Is like, you are expected to have this path that you begin on at a really specific point in your life, and as we specialize more and more with your college major and beyond, it gets harder and harder, or it can feel harder and harder to kind of reverse and switch tracks. And I think that adds to the pressure to take on a field like STEM, which seems as more traditionally uh, like likely for success, because it feels like we can take fewer and fewer risks with our career as we get further and further along. And And it's scary to make that decision when you're 17 years old or 18 years old. So,
or even sooner. Like I'm always amazed.
yeah.
Like so in my high school, I always tell people this. I grew up in like a rural town in like Western Pennsylvania, and which came with a lot of different things, which is strange, but whatever. So basically, like we only had like 2 AP classes in the whole school. Like we had like Calc AB and A Push, and that was it. That was like the only ones we offered straight up. Like I didn't even know. Had no clue there were so many until I started working here in general, right? And like it's kind of amazing to me. Like I'll talk to people in like ninth grade even who just like, and I understand like parents feel this way or something, or maybe they feel this way themselves. That like I got to do this sequence of classes, and it often is specifically in science in order to make sure I do all of them and I'm ready so I can take the blank subject SAT and all this stuff. And I get it. I do like where it's coming from, but it's just kind of like remarkable to me sometimes the way things become so highly specialized so early, and like putting that kind of either pressure on yourselves or like railroading yourself like from like ninth grade on is like it's a lot. It's just a lot to kind of handle and have to grapple with when so much of your life is in flux literally all the time, but also especially in high school.
And you know what I blame for that? This like we have to get more and more specialized earlier and earlier. I seriously, the fall of the humanities is the reason for that, because a long time ago, universities didn't necessarily prepare people for the really specific kind of knowledge that they do now. So right now you get a degree that is really specific and you have to learn a lot of information about that field during your 4 years. But the way universities used to be structured is they just taught you how to think. You just learned, you read a lot, you learned the different ways that people solve problems, you learned how to think for yourself, to think critically and analyze the human condition. And then they gave you, when they felt like you were ready, then you got your degree and were able to go into any field because now you had these skills to be able to learn how to do stuff and solve problems. So if you wanted to use those skills in the arts, you could. If you wanted to pursue the sciences, you can do that. But everyone kind of graduates with the general knowledge of just like how to think. And once they've learned how to think, then they can kind of choose. And as those types of classes and courses are cut and replaced with more empirical fields like STEM fields, then that's when the specialization thing starts to creep in. And it's the reason that ninth graders are worried about like what med school they're going to get into.
Yeah. And yeah, similarly, I am glad that a lot of colleges you have to take like your major classes and then like general education, like gen eds, where you're supposed to take like I'd take like a history class and like a humanities class actually is one of the categories like for my major and stuff. And I think those kind of things are just so good. Like one of my favorite classes I ever took in college was like a film class with Ellen Bishop. She was great, loved her. And I like I just love movies. I love watching them. I love thinking about them. I love talking about them with people. Like I think it's just great. It's just like one of my absolute favorite things to do. Way more than I like to just like sit down and create solutions to task 32 in physics. Like I like watching movies way more, right? Which is like not a brave take at all, but still, it's like those types of things. Like if I didn't take that class, I don't know, I just probably wouldn't think of things the same way, or would have gotten into certain things that I've seen or talked to certain people that I met there and all this stuff. So like this kind of broad education is like so valuable. You get to like learn things for the sake of learning them and not just like, I need to learn this specifically so that I'm able to do this other task. Like that's obviously good. And it's good to like, be well prepared in like specific ways, but also, right, we want to be like, learn about other things and like expand our horizons.
I think as like since like we're going through it now, kind of like you're kind of like pressured really like when you enter high school. It's like what are you gonna be when you grow up? Like what are you gonna major in? And then you kind of like tweak your schedules to fit that. Be like okay, if I'm gonna do like a doctor, I'll take biology. If my school has anatomy, something like that. But if you guys were back in high school, let's pretend for a second, and you were interested in the other field, what job or like what kind of path would you take?
Chambers, wait, are you really saying when did you graduate high school? I'm just curious. Do you want to say on the pod? You don't want to? It's up to you.
2012.
Oh, okay. I'm just curious.
Oh.
Like it's like same. It's not even same era. It's like same basically. Like I graduated in 2013.
Yeah.
School,
We're about the same age.
So okay.
Okay. If I decided in high school that I was going to pursue a STEM field, I definitely wouldn't have not taken a math class senior year. I probably would have been really interested in engineering, I especially like civil planning, like the idea of like, especially like how to design like a town, or like we have this like big
Like city
empty
planning
space
stuff.
of beach, like what do we do? I think that sort of thing is so cool and so directly impactful in people's lives, and there's a lot of science behind what works for that. I also really like bridges. I think bridges are awesome. I'm
Bridges are
obsessed
beautiful
with
too.
bridges. Bridges rule. Bridges are so cool. I just love thinking about bridges. I love walking on them. I love driving over them. I want to build bridges.
I love a bridge. Pittsburgh is the city of bridges. They got them. They have like the
Pittsburgh
most
is
per
where
capita.
the bridges are at.
Love it. That's a good question. I like this question because oh yeah, and speaking of what Chambers said, there's a lot of fields that like pretty overtly use STEM and humanities, like architecture, right, and like city planning and all this sort of stuff are like pretty overtly a mix of both. Like especially architecture is like a key one, right? Like you don't need to know necessarily all the nitty gritty of like the math behind like how a support beam works, but you need to know some of it. And then obviously there's like this immensely creative part of like how you want to design whatever building or structure you're making. But architecture is not what I would pick. I would go back in high school and think of this. I don't know. I always really like, I thought for a while I was going to major in something like English. Like my best friend was an English major and she teaches English now. And I like reading. I like things related to English, like, you know, studying film and stuff like that. And I think that's probably what I would end up doing if I did a humanities thing. Like I really love the literature classes I took in college. They were great. It's like really fun to like think about a book in like a real meaningful way and like talk about it with people. Especially when you're like actually reading the book, you know, like spark noting it, right? Like books are like great when you
Right,
read them and
ladies?
you don't feel pressure, right?
They know all about it. They read all of their books. They don't spark
Yeah,
notes.
I think Maria was just like, "What is spark notes?" She doesn't even know. You know,
I
she's
She
like,
doesn't
"What is
know
that?"
because she's like,
I
I
do.
read the book twice
Yeah,
before it's due in English.
Marie, do you know what spark notes is?
Um,
Are you
yes.
familiar? How do you know about it? It's strange.
Wait, do kids don't use spark notes anymore?
Yeah,
Do they
some
not?
people do. Yeah, some people still do.
Okay, I was gonna say it's like the place, right?
Online.
You go
When
to.
when me and Mr. Marks were in high school, we had to like go to the bookstore and buy like Spark Notes books.
Yeah, they came in like
They
little
weren't online.
pamphlets.
You had to like physically buy.
Yeah, they
You had
weren't
to be
readily available.
You had to be committed to being lazy.
Also, if you're buying a Spark Notes book, like that you're gonna read, just read the book. Like, what are you doing? Like crazy in retrospect. Also in like current spect. That's wild.
Yeah, I didn't know that was a thing. Like they made like those like thin Spark Notes books about the book, really?
I think
Oh
I've
yeah.
seen them around in like Barnes and
Like,
Noble or somewhere. They
yeah,
might
I mean,
still
they
have.
probably still make them.
Really a
Like, if you're gonna go
shame.
through that much work, just read
I know.
it.
Also, Barnes and Noble, have some like self-respect. Don't sell Spark Notes books. Like, what are you doing?
Getting money.
Also, I like how
Gotta
Barnes
stay
and Noble
alive.
is like low key kind of the good guy now. People used to hate Barnes and Noble for killing independent bookstores, which was not good. Don't get me wrong. But now I view Barnes and Noble as like the good guy because Amazon is running every other book place out of town. So like crazy how things shift so quickly. Obviously, local
Yeah.
bookstores are best, but like I don't know, just something to think about sometimes.
All right. Well,
Buy, here's an ad. Buy from your local bookstore.
yes, that
Is
is.
there one
that-
in
Put that in
HP?
your
Yes,
your
we
ad
are
space.
actually having another word from our sponsors right after this.
This episode of the T of HP is brought to you by Coach's Choice. Coach's Choice USA/Select is a basketball training group that runs camps, clinics, and tournaments throughout the East Coast, as well as manage pro athletes. For more information, call Tom Sclafani at 732-501-4155 or go to their website at coacheschoiceselect.com.
But yeah, like where do you get your like lab equipment, Mr. Marks? Amazon or like specific
No,
site?
I really try to avoid it like the plague because it's just like so like it's kind of interesting. This is the way things work sometimes, like with Amazon or whatever. Because it's like so business is another example of a mix of like it's sort of science stuff, but it's also used in like icky ways sometimes. It's like when you have a lot of money like Amazon, what you do is like you purposefully can sell stuff and lose money on the sale, right? So like this is a real thing that happens. So like they'll sell. This would happen like the OG case with books, where like they would sell books for super cheap, right? And and they would lose money like every sale. They would lose like 10 cents basically on the sale, and you're like, why would that make sense? Well, it's because like while you're buying the book from Amazon, right? You're not buying it from like a local store. So eventually the local store like runs out of business, and then you just increase your price again because there's nowhere else to buy it from, which is a real thing that happened. And this is the kind of case too where like there's like a, where Chambers was saying before, this is like a thing you could write a mathematical model for this pretty easily and show that like, look, if I can just wait long enough, I can run this other business out of business, lose a little bit of money, but then on the back end, I'll make a lot, right? Because then they have to buy books from me because there's nowhere else to buy them from. And you can model this with like an equation and you can graph it over time and all this stuff. It's a great example of like, you can do it, but should you, right? And like, you should think about that. Like at what cost in a non-literal sense are you doing these type of things? Is I don't know, interesting.
I say that all the time. People are always talking about like envisioning the future and kind of our system of like American capitalism and the way that it promotes innovation. But not all innovation is good. And I think the reason that STEM and humanities need to stay linked is that humanities kind of encourages STEM to ask that question of like, okay, this is an innovation. It's new. Yes. Do we want it? There's lots of innovation. They're always innovating new types of like bombs and drones. Is that good for humanity? Probably not. And so
it's one of the things.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I was talking to Gold about where one of the things I know at least this class does, and I really like that they do, is like this idea of like these historical reenactments where like you embody a certain person, right? Like Oppenheimer or Truman or something. And I know recently you were talking about the bomb, right? Like the bomb, Nagasaki and Hiroshima in World War II. And I think it's like a great case of like, the scientists were brought in, the Manhattan Project is the thing, right? To work on this and build this. And I think it's a great question of like, when you're the scientist in that case, are you under like some ethical obligation to stop because you know eventually what your work could be used for? Or do you kind of like tell yourself like, I'm just doing the science, like, which is just purely knowledge, right? And like, it's not really my decision what happens to it, which is sort of true. But I really like that, like, in APUSH, you folks do stuff like that because I think it's really neat to think about like, what was this person thinking at the time? Why were they thinking it? And like, was this decision in hindsight like the right one or not, right?
Yeah.
So great mix there.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about figures of history, if you guys could like be any person or like any like well-known renowned person in your field and could say anything to them, who would you choose and what would you say?
I need to think.
Oh my God.
Who do you want to meet the most?
I think I'll give a boring answer that's not that interesting, but I still think is maybe the case for me. Our guy Einstein, he's pretty well known for a lot of different stuff, but for good reason. He was like a genius in like the truest sense of the word. Like it's just crazy what he was able to do. So it's another great story. The way science doesn't work now. So if you didn't know, Einstein, he worked at a patent office, right? So he was just this dude who worked in like a normal office doing like clerical work, and just happened to be one of the smartest human beings to ever walk on planet Earth, right? And so what he did, right, was like he worked in a patent office, just like doing normal work or whatever, and he just started like reading, and he wrote this thing that literally changed how we view reality, and he just submitted it to like professors who worked in the field of physics, and they're like, wow, this is crazy. And like that kind of thing could never happen now, like just because of this, like we talked about before, there's all these barriers to entry of like, that's just like not how the field works at all. Like you couldn't just do that. But yeah, so I guess Einstein, I'd like to chat with him. I don't know what we would talk about, really, honestly. I think I just tell him like, talk at me for like an hour, and I'll just sit here and listen to it. That'd be great. I'd be pumped. I'd show him what a phone is and everything. I'm like, look, we could take a picture together and all this other stuff. I'm sure he'd love it. We'd have a nice chat. I think he liked tea. We would drink some tea, and it'd be great.
I think you'll be mind blown by how a camera works.
I think so. I think he'd be impressed. So I could pull one over on him there.
Yeah, you could feel smart.
Yeah, it'd be a real great
your
moment.
iPhone in front of Einstein.
Like, Albert, have you ever seen this?
Bet you didn't imagine this. If I had to speak to someone in my field, I would probably choose one of my favorite composers. One of my favorite composers is a man named Schoenberg, and he lived kind of in the beginning of the 20th century, and he was really cool because he basically invented atonal music, as in like there's no key anymore. We're not there's no key signature. Sometimes there'd be a key signature, but he was like the idea of like feeling nice and fuzzy and warm when you finish a song. Like, I don't want to do that. I want to explore what music can really do when it's truly expressive, when it doesn't quite like fit into a box of what we expect it to sound like. um and it was, I think really brave of him to make trying to take music out of this field of like, this is a thing that's just supposed to like sound pretty, into something totally different. He asked the fundamental question of like, what is the function of music when it's not pretty? Does music that's not pretty have a function? Can we blur that line between what's beautiful and what's not? Can we learn to love new things that we didn't think were beautiful? Can we come to find beauty in them? I think he was such a genius, and he was a Jewish composer, and so he eventually had to flee Austria and came to America, and so he also just lived a very interesting life. And I would just love to get into the mind of somebody who kind of really changed the world in terms of beauty and art and music.
Nice. All right, I guess we could end it off with this question. So, what kind of advice would you give someone who's interested in pursuing your type of career?
Be brave. Make decisions based on what you know that you need to do. Have that dream and make decisions for that dream. Don't make decisions based on what you think is a path to success, because everyone successful in the field of the arts has found their own way to be successful, and there's ways to do that beyond what you can even fathom. So start with the dream, start with the passion, and the path will clear for you from there. Trust it and be brave.
Hmm. I would say that the biggest thing you can do is just like, this goes for anything, but I think a lot of times in like the way undergrad is in STEM fields is like kind of like really brutal in terms of like they're trying to like weed people out, which is like a cruel phrase, but is very common. And I would say like find a cohort of people that you want to study with and work with and like really get to know. I think it's like so huge that like it's not just like an additional thing you can do. Like it's like not just saying like in addition to studying, you can also find a cohort. It should be like the foundational aspect of how you approach like your studying habits and everything. Well, not just study, I keep using that word, but like just in general, like it's like that's how you find the joy in like when you learn something, instead of just learning it on your own and just like sort of understanding it or not, like bouncing your ideas off with someone, or just like you just like it's a good way to like one understand things more, but two like because then you're talking with someone who also loves the field, right? So it like just increases your enjoyment of it by going back and forth in that way. So like find people you want to work with for real. Don't
Yeah.
be like independence is good, but like working with others is like the thing.
Yeah, individualism is overrated. I think that's true for any field. Like, find your people and cling to them because that's so valuable. People who love what you love and make you love it more and make you hungrier for it. That's like, those are the ingredients of life.
Yeah. Affirmation is good. Affirm your friends. Tell your friends you love them. It's great.
Mm-hmm.
You should do
Totally
so. Be
appreciate
overt
them.
about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everyone
You don't need
deserves
a reason.
appreciated. Yep. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for agreeing to guest star on our podcast today. It was really fun, and we got like enlightened about these two fields. We got to know more, and it really opened our minds about what these two fields are like.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thanks. This was fun. I'm so glad. I'm
Yeah.
excited to listen to it. Is that weird? Do I want to listen to the pod we were on? Yeah,
Yeah.
I guess I'm excited to listen to it.
Listen
This
to
was
your
great.
own
Yeah.
beautiful voice. Yes. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for guest starring, and thank you for the listeners for listening. We will see you on the next podcast, and we will also end with one final word from our sponsors. Thank you.
This episode of the T of HP is brought to you by Coach's Choice. Coach's Choice USA/Select is a basketball training group that runs camps, clinics, and tournaments throughout the East Coast, as well as manage pro athletes. For more information, call Tom Sclafani at 732-501-4155 or go to their website at coacheschoiceselect.com.